At the company celebration party, the handsome intern playfully asked my wife to see my hearing aid. She laughed as she took it off and handed it to him. He looked it over, clearly unimpressed, and then tossed it to the ground. I quickly reached to pick it up, but he accidentally stepped on my hand. The sharp pain in my fingers was nothing compared to seeing my hearing aid crushed. When I put it back on, I was angry and wanted to confront him, but my wife slapped me across the face. "Richard," she said, "this party is to celebrate Steven's new software design. Don't make a scene here." Seeing my wife's angry look and Steven's smug grin, I forced a smile. I took off the hearing aid and tossed it in the trash, then turned to leave. It was the most precious gift from my wife when we got engaged. But now, both she and the broken hearing aid were things I no longer wanted. In front of everyone, I calmly threw the hearing aid in the trash and smiled. "Enjoy your party. I'm heading home," I said and walked away. As my ears returned to silence, I felt like I was in another world, isolated. I saw my wife, Maria, looking angry, but I didn't care. Outside the room, I messaged my buddy Jack. "I'm quitting in the next few days to join your company." His reply was almost instant, filled with excitement. "Great, we can develop software together. There's a huge future there." Jack didn't ask too many questions, and I was grateful. Back in college, Jack and I were both computer science majors, with a love for coding and software development. We even teamed up for competitions multiple times, winning various awards. After graduation, he moved to another city to start his own company, while I stayed to marry Maria and work at her family's tech company. Jack's business grew fast, but my career was stagnant. He often lamented that my talent was wasted and asked me to join him, but I always declined to stay with Maria. But now, Maria has changed too much because of this new intern. Staying didn't make sense anymore. Back home, I took out a new hearing aid and put it on. My phone dinged with a message from Steven. It was a video and I opened it. The dim lighting showed they were at a karaoke room. Maria held a microphone and looked at the camera with affection. "This song is for Steven, who's so talented," she said and started singing. Her voice was captivating, but my heart stopped. Even though Maria often sings off-key, she had practiced this song, Prank, for a long time just for me. Since childhood, I'd lost most of my hearing, but Maria would sweetly sing in my ear, so I could hear her clearly. Her smile back then was warm and radiant as she said, "Richard, I learned this song for you. I'll only sing it for you." At that moment, a string in my heart snapped, filled with affection for her. But now, she was singing it for Steven, violating a promise she made to me. I closed the video with a bitter smile and looked around the room. It was cold and lonely. I opened the closet and started packing a suitcase. Maria didn't come home until nearly 1 in the morning, looking angry as she saw me calmly watching TV on the couch. "I texted you to come get me. Why didn't you?" she scolded. Usually, I'd go downstairs to fetch her when she's out for social events late. This time, I didn't feel like rushing to her. I grabbed my phone. Our chat was filled with my messages, and she barely replied. The latest, "Be home soon." Cold and straightforward. Looking at Maria, I replied, "I didn't see your message," without emotion. She marched over and continued scolding. "Richard, what are you doing? Steven is younger. You need to cut him some slack. He just accidentally stepped on your hearing aid, and you made a scene. Did you consider my feelings?" I listened quietly without responding. My gaze landed on her neck, noticing a hickey. Seeing my look, Maria faltered and covered it clumsily with her collar, but kept her hard tone. "Me slapping you was a lesson. Don't act like this again. Be more understanding toward Steven." I nodded, not arguing. "I got it. I'm tired. I'm gonna rest," I said, then headed to the bedroom. Maria's face was sour, and she scoffed as I walked away. Lying in bed, I closed my eyes but couldn't calm my thoughts. "Just accidentally stepped on your hearing aid," she said. But it was the precious gift she gave me when we got together, and I'd always treasured it carefully. Despite its age, it still worked perfectly. Back then, she happily put the hearing aid on me, and the world became clear. I heard her sweet voice. "Richard, I like you." It was the best sound I'd ever heard. Yet, Maria easily dismissed it after Stephen crushed it. She seemed to forget its significance to me. In the living room, Maria laughed sweetly, sending voice messages. Then a new beep from Stephen. A screenshot of him chatting with Maria. They were having a lively conversation, ending with her sending a loving good night. "Richard, you and Maria should rest early. I won't bother you." Stephen's message was taunting. I closed my eyes, ignoring it. After finishing her skincare routine, Maria went to another bedroom. Ever since Stephen joined the company, Maria got close and stopped sleeping next to me. My love for Maria seems to be fading away slowly. After getting up the next day, I wrote a resignation letter. Then, I went to the best law firm in the city to hire a lawyer to draft a divorce agreement. Only after that did I head to the office to continue with my work. Maria was at Stephen's desk, heads close, discussing something intimately. Funny thing is, seeing them like this now doesn't really bother me. Stephen noticed me and greeted, "Richard, you're late today. You don't look so good. Didn't sleep well last night?" There was a hint of provocation and smugness in his eyes as he leaned closer to Maria. He's been with the company long enough that he thinks he doesn't have to follow the rules. At this rate, he won't last here much longer. Before I could say anything, Maria frowned and started criticizing me. I gave a faint smile, looked at the two of them, and calmly said, "I'll pay more attention in the future. Thanks for the reminder, boss." Maria's face turned dark at my reply. I rarely called her boss, but now my tone was polite and distant. Ignoring them, I sat at my workspace and dove into work. I'm wrapping up my last project, and even though I'm leaving soon, my sense of responsibility pushes me to finish it. During lunch, Maria pulled up her car in front of the company, and Stephen eagerly jumped into the passenger seat. When I walked by, Stephen called out, "Richard, Maria and I are going to the Italian restaurant. Join us." Despite his words, it didn't seem like he had any intention of giving up the passenger seat. I shook my head, smiled, and said, "I'm not a fan of Italian food, you guys go ahead." I walked away without looking back. Maria's voice faintly called out, "His temper's been foul lately. Ignore him. Let's just go eat." I smiled, erasing them from my thoughts. While eating, I casually scrolled through my social media and saw a post from Stephen. "When the boss knows you smoke, she gifts you this branded lighter. Best boss ever. I'll work for her forever." I raised an eyebrow at the picture he posted. There was a fancy lighter on the table. The background was clearly Italian food, and in one corner, Maria's delicate fingers were visible. Back when Maria and I started dating, I had a habit of smoking under stress. She'd always take the cigarette from my hand, smoke it herself, and end up coughing with tears in her eyes. I quickly stub it out and pat her back. With teary eyes, she'd pout and half-jokingly, half-annoyed, say, "Richard, I hate the smell. If I catch you smoking again, I'll smoke it myself and make you worry." With her small fists and adorable demeanor, she looked so cute. I'd smile helplessly and quit smoking for her. Once Stephen came along, Maria's attitude towards me started wavering. Sometimes, I'd find myself taking a puff again, and she'd always scold with disgust, telling me to stop because she hated the smell. Yet now, she's given Stephen a lighter. I shook my head and put my phone away, a dull feeling growing inside me. After work, I came home to find a suit Maria had customized for me was delivered. She loves dressing up both herself and me. Since we got married, all my clothes have been picked by her. Whenever I put on new clothes, her eyes would light up, and she'd twirl around me, praising my fit and calling me a natural clothes hanger, eventually diving into my arms to plant a kiss on my cheek. Maria always said I looked best in suits, so she'd order the latest ones each season and have them sent home. Remembering this stirred something inside me. I tried on the suit only to find it didn't fit at all. Maria knows my size well, and after ordering clothes for so long, the store shouldn't have made a mistake. I took the suit off, put it back in its bag, and drove to the store. There, I unexpectedly ran into Maria and Stephen. "Stephen, you look great in that suit." Maria exclaimed, "I've set up an account for you here. Feel free to come by often, it's on me." I glanced over at them. Stephen was straight-backed in the newest suit of the season, while Maria looked on with a flushed face, both exchanging smiles with a hint of intimacy. "Mr. Richard, what brings you here?" A store clerk recognized me and shouted. Her voice was just loud enough that both Maria and Stephen heard. They quickly separated and turned towards me. Maria's face quickly turned angry as she marched over. "Richard, what are you doing here? Were you following me? You've got some nerve." I looked at her calmly, then at Stephen behind her. I sized him up from height to shoulder measurements. Letting out a soft chuckle, I realized my suit was ill-fitting because Maria had mixed up my measurements with Stephen's. "I wasn't following you. The suit you ordered arrived, but it's not my size, so I'm here to return it," I said, swinging the garment bag in front of her. "Here it is, I have other things to do, won't disturb you too." I turned to leave, with a mix of emotions crossing Maria's face as she glared at me. "Richard, don't go too far. There's nothing between Stephen and me. Don't think so lowly of us." I shrugged with a smile. I didn't think anything of it, no need to get worked up. With that, I turned and left smoothly. I felt a sense of progress. Seeing Maria and Stephen interact no longer hurt as much. Later that evening, Maria surprisingly came into my room after her shower. She was wearing a thin nightgown, her curves clearly outlined. Her dark curly hair cascaded over her shoulders. That scent of perfume I love lingered on her. She gently climbed onto the bed and hugged me from behind. "Richard, don't get me wrong about these past days. There's really nothing going on with Stephen. He's just good at what he does, and I'm valuing a good talent. I've been a little distant from you. It's been so long since we—" "Richard, turn around and hold me," said Maria in a soft, coquettish way. I felt a bit shaken inside. Her hands touched me. Not loving Maria would be a lie. During my long, dark teenage years after losing my hearing, she was the only light, giving me endless warmth and love. 10 years with her meant so much to me. I no longer wanted to hold back. I turned around and embraced her tightly, kissing her passionately. She received my kisses, which felt like a release. I reached for my hearing aid, wanting to take it off for something more. But Maria's phone rang at the wrong moment. A bad feeling rose inside me. She picked up the call and, after a brief conversation, pushed me away and sat up anxiously. "Richard, Stephen seems to have a fever and feels really bad. I'll go check on him." Slipping on her shoes, she hurried out without another glance at me. I listened as the door opened and closed again. Everything went silent. Sitting alone on the bed, I slowly felt her lingering presence fade away. The phone beeped. A message from Stephen. "Richard, I'm not feeling well. Please ask Maria to see me. Don't be mad. Okay?" I stared blankly at my phone and let out a silent laugh. Stephen, he won. Maria didn't return until the next morning. She apologized to me, but I just nodded calmly, unbothered. I packed up all my luggage, booked a flight to the city where Jack lives for the next day, and finished the final touches on a project at work, then submitted my resignation. I took a cab to the cemetery and sat quietly at my grandmother's grave. With my imminent departure from this city, I felt unexpectedly calm, not a hint of reluctance. Maybe I've been hurt enough that I'm numb inside. Leaning against the tombstone, I babbled on to my grandma, watching clouds drift by until night fell and then headed home. Opening the door, I was greeted by unexpected liveliness. Balloons and decor filled the space with flowers and gifts everywhere. A happy birthday banner hung on the wall, leaving me dumbfounded. "Richard, you're back. Today's my birthday." Stephen appeared with a cheeky grin and glanced over at the dining table. Following his gaze, I saw the array of dishes. Maria said she wanted to show off her cooking skills. "She's such a kind-hearted person. I envy you." Though he said he envied me, Stephen's glee about Maria's efforts for him dripped with satisfaction. I forced a smile, uninterested in his antics, and turned towards my room. But something caught my eye in the corner of the room, making me pause. Stephen noticed my reaction, laughed unconcernedly in my ear, and went, Oh, that? While decorating, I accidentally knocked it over. Maria said it's fine, she'd clean it up later. Richard, I'm so clumsy. Don't mind. Okay? On the floor lay the delicately framed photo of my grandmother, now shattered. Her smiling face in the picture was marred by visible black footprints. His casual words filled me with rage. Unable to hold back, I swung a punch at him. My mind went blank, overcome by fury. As Stephen's lips curled into a barely noticeable smirk, he started yelling. My punches rained down on him, each met with a grunt. Richard, what are you doing? Stop it. Maria rushed out of the kitchen, screaming as she slapped me hard and pushed me away, helping Stephen up. I glared at them, eyes red. It's just a photo. No need to overreact. Stephen's hurt because of you. Are you just bitter because you're deaf and can't stand healthy people? What's your deal? Maria shouted angrily, helping a limping Stephen out of the house. My nose tingled. My heart ached sharply. Trembling, I carefully picked up my grandma's broken photo, wiped the dirt off with a sleeve, and placed it in my suitcase. Maria didn't return that night, and I didn't sleep. Before leaving, I took one last look at the apartment, left the divorce papers on the table, and walked out with my suitcase, resolute. I wouldn't come between Maria and Stephen again. I messaged Maria, divorce, then blocked and deleted all contacts of her and Stephen. Sleep hit me slowly on the plane, which was dreamless, thankfully. Upon landing, Jack was already waiting. He took my suitcase, a look of curiosity in his eyes, but he didn't ask, just patted my shoulder. Back in the day, we were unbeatable together. I'm really glad you're here. I smiled back at him, a bit of anticipation and future prospects warming my heart. Jack settled me in, then took me to get on board at work and to get used to company operations. I joined a project developing new software and poured myself into work. Immersed in code, I rediscovered that familiar, carefree feeling. Ideas flowed easily. After suggesting some improvements, my colleagues looked at me with new respect. No wonder Mr. wanted so badly to recruit you. You're great, a colleague praised endlessly. I smiled gently, satisfied with my life now. After that project ended, the client is really happy with us. Jack even gave us a big ol' bonus. He took us out for a celebration dinner, and I became the star of the night. No more public humiliation for me. After we left the restaurant, the cool evening breeze hit my face, and I sobered up a bit. Then there was Richard. Turns out you were hiding here. What's up with all this drama? A furious voice shouted at me. Then Maria rushed over. It had been a while since I'd seen her. She seemed worn out, glaring at me angrily. Come back with me. You can't just run off whenever you want. You're such a troublemaker. Maria grabbed me, trying to drag me away, waking me up instantly. I shook off her arm, stood my ground, and just gave her a cold stare. Maria couldn't believe it. Richard, you... I cut her off, my voice icy. Let's get a divorce. I'm done. The papers are on the table. You've probably already seen them. Her shock was clear as day. A divorce? She stammered. I nodded without a hint of humor. Just then, my ride pulled up. I walked away, leaving Maria standing there speechless. She followed me into the car, dazed, still not fully grasping what I'd said. Richard, I took off my hearing aid, finally finding some peace. Maria sat next to me, dazed, and followed me like a shadow when I got out. As I entered my home, Maria tagged along, trying to come in with me. I blocked her at the door. Go sign the divorce papers. We're done. Her face went pale as the realization hit her. No, I'm not leaving. I'm not divorcing you. Richard, let me in or I'll sit here all night. Back in the day, when we were dating, Maria would pout, and I'd give in almost instantly. But now, she looked at me with tear-streaked eyes, and I just felt nothing. Suit yourself, I said, shutting the door despite the plea in her eyes. The alcoholic buzz hit me again, and my head throbbed as I washed up and passed out. The next morning, as I was going out, I found her curled up in the corner. She really stayed all night. Hearing the noise, she opened her eyes and quickly came over. Richard, I thought all night. It's my fault. I shouldn't have gotten too close to Steven and ignored your feelings. I looked calmly at Maria, tired and with dark circles under her eyes. I'll keep my distance in the future. Can you not do this? Come back with me? She sounded desperate, no longer proud. I shook my head. There's no going back. With that, I left for work, diving back into a satisfying job. At Maria's company, despite my talents, I was always sidelined, especially when a young hotshot like Steven joined. Maria favored him, and he always tried to outshine me, even stealing credit for my work. Maria stood by while he humiliated me in public, trampling on my love little by little. Luckily, I chose to leave and shake off the gloom. Just as I was deep into some coding, Jack came over, patting my shoulder, with a complicated look. Richard, Maria is at the front desk causing a scene looking for you. Go check it out. I frowned and headed to the front. Maria's eyes lit up when she saw me. She left the others and rushed over with a smile. Richard, look, I got this custom suit for you. Sorry for messing up the size last time. I've canceled Steven's card. He won't bother us again. I felt conflicted, refusing the bag she offered. I don't need it. You don't need to please me. Tears began to well in Maria's eyes. She came closer to hug me. Richard, stop being mad at me. I know I was wrong. I shook her off, my patience running out. Maria, how many times do I have to say it? We're over. Stop wasting your efforts and stop making a scene here. Normally, I kept my cool with Maria, but seeing how serious I was, tears welled up in her eyes. Go home. I sighed and walked away, her hand brushing the fabric of my coat, but not managing to keep me from leaving. I thought refusing her at work would make her give up, but I didn't expect her to be waiting at my door when I got home from work. Richard, you're back. I went to the grocery store and got a ton of ingredients to make you a special dinner tonight. Maria greeted me with a beaming smile. I noticed the sweat on her nose and her flushed cheeks, bags of groceries in hand. Her upbeat voice almost made me feel like it was old times, when things were good between us. But then I snapped back to reality. Maria looked up at me with wide eyes. I shook my head. You don't have to do this. She insisted, holding the door as I tried to close it. Let me in, she said, desperate. I gave in, and she came in, bustling around the kitchen preparing a meal. For a moment it was like the old days, but only in the faintest way. Soon the table was filled with aromatic dishes. Maria's eyes sparkled as she urged me to try them. She was stubborn like before when she pursued me. Her unwavering determination eventually broke down my defenses. I ended up loving her with all my heart for 10 years. Richard, we've loved each other for so long. I can't bear to let you go. Seeing me just stare at the food, Maria's hope faded a bit, and her voice turned solemn. I won't give up. I'll bring you back, she insisted with a bright smile, full of confidence. Then, a ringing interrupted us. Maria froze as she picked up her phone. It didn't take much for me to know who was on the other end. I laughed at myself, picking up the chopsticks. But then the doorbell rang. I stood up to open the door. Before I could react, I got shoved hard. I lost my balance. Yelling and cursing came at me full force. Richard, just go ahead and divorce Maria already. Don't keep stringing her along. All us guys know what you're up to. You think I don't know you're trying to patch things up? It was Steven coming in hot. Maria gasped, running over to steady me. I pushed her arm away, staring coldly at both of them. How did you know where I live? I pressed Steven, staring him down. Come on, I've had location sharing with Maria. I'm not like you, Steven replied with a nasty grin. He gave me a mocking look. Steven, stop it, Maria snapped, but it was like denying the obvious. I smiled faintly. Any doubts Maria had stirred in me vanished instantly. I won't fight over Maria. I'm over it. Once she signs the divorce papers, we're done, I said, looking them both coldly. Now please leave my house. The air got tense for a second. Smart move, Steven scoffed. Quit while you're ahead. He wasn't done talking when a sharp slap interrupted him. He looked at Maria, stunned. Why are you butting into my business with Richard? Maria's voice was icy. Steven's eyes filled with frustration and resentment. But I ignored it, ushering them out of my home. Turning around, I dumped the meal Maria prepared into the trash. I could hear them arguing faintly outside. Then my phone rang. It was a former colleague. "Richard, the project we worked on has a bug we can't fix. Is there any way you can look at it? Maria's not around, and Steven is AWOL. The client's on our back. I'm really stuck here," he said. I smirked. I knew the project had issues. Steven had taken the credit for my work. The team knew it too, but no one spoke up. Now they expect me to clean up the mess? "Sorry, I don't have time. Find someone else," I answered. I wondered how Maria would react if she found out Steven didn't actually do the work. But that's not my problem anymore. Not the company or Maria. The next morning, Maria was waiting downstairs for me. "Richard, I brought you breakfast," she offered eagerly. I took it and threw it straight into the trash in front of her. "Don't bother next time," I told her, adding, "Seems like your company's in trouble." I left Maria standing there. Her affection had once been intense, but it faded. I thought we'd grow old together. Turns out, she couldn't resist something new. Too many disappointments had burned out our years together. The sky turned gloomy, and soon it started to rain. Maria stood alone in the rain, stubbornly waiting for me. I looked away. "Richard, can you bring me an umbrella?" The call came from a strange number, but it was still Maria. I saw her small figure in the rain and sighed. "Go home. Don't be foolish." That's all I said. Maria remained, hoping I'd change my mind. But inside I just felt empty. The rain grew heavier, and when I looked again, she was gone. Later that afternoon, I got an unexpected call. "Mr. Richard, your wife is in the hospital. Could you come?" I gritted my teeth, grabbed the divorce papers, and headed to the hospital. Maria fainted in the rain and was brought in by a kind stranger. She had a fever, her face flushed on the hospital bed. "Richard, I knew you'd come," she said weakly when she saw me. Before I could respond, Steven burst into the room. "Maria, I'm here," he blurted, then turned his fury on me. "You just won't leave Maria alone." "Huh?" he yelled, swinging a punch at me. I took the hit, grunting in pain. "Steven, stop," Maria shouted urgently. I wiped the blood off my lip, setting down the papers. "Sign it, Maria." In front of Steven, "Let's end this," I told her. I didn't want hatred. My mind was set as I stared at her. Maria turned pale. She knew I was serious. With shaky hands, she signed her name on the papers. "Congrats, you dumped that trash at last," Steven cheered. But Maria closed her eyes, tears slipping out. As I left the room, I heard Maria say, "Steven, you're fired." Drained, I returned home, still clutching the divorce papers. My 10 years with Maria were finally over. I deleted all our photos from my phone. Years of memories gone in an instant. Jack invited me out for drinks. In a haze of alcohol, I ended this relationship. Maria left the city. I started my new life too. Jack started setting me up on blind dates all the time. He hoped I'd quickly move past the pain. I politely declined his offer with a smile. Right now, being alone suits me better. One day after work, I parked my car in the basement garage. Just as I got out, someone punched me. "Richard, what kind of spell did you put on Maria? She not only fired me, she also canceled all the cards she gave me. What money does a recent grad like me have? Now I'm drowning in debt, and the company is holding me responsible. You ruined my promising future." Steven's furious voice echoed in my ears. I held back the pain and clenched my fist. I swung hard at him. In the hospital room, I put up with Steven's antics to avoid losing my cool in front of Maria. But now I didn't have to hold back any longer. We fought. When I first met Maria, I was often bullied because I couldn't hear. I had to fight to protect myself. Maria used to silently apply ointment to my injuries. Back then, it was about self-defense. Now it was about defending Maria. Thinking of that, my anger towards Steven surged again, and I hit harder until someone pulled us apart. I spat out a mouthful of blood and smirked at Steven. We were taken to the police station. After they took our statements and lectured us, we were finally free to go. Maria rushed over from another city. She wore an exhausted look and silently glanced at me. We had once been close, but now we were just strangers drifting apart. "Stephen, don't bother me again," I said, glaring at him. Fear finally flickered on his face. "Richard, you—" Maria started to speak hesitantly. "Let's keep it formal and stick to full names," I replied. I looked at Maria and felt completely at peace. From now on, we had no ties. After saying that, I felt a weight lift off me. I turned and walked away, without a trace of reluctance. The road ahead was long, but Maria would no longer be by my side. Maria's epilogue. The first time I saw Richard, I was skipping class and hiding in the sports equipment room. He was sitting in a dim corner, his head lowered, with his hair covering his brow. He startled me. I approached and patted his shoulder. When he looked up at me, my breath caught. His eyes were the most beautiful I'd ever seen. I asked him, "What's your name?" He saw my lips move, pointed at his ear, and waved his hand. Turns out he couldn't hear. I fumbled around for some paper and a pen and handed them to him. He smiled, despite the bruises on his face, which did nothing to lessen his good looks. He scribbled down Richard in flowing script. So he was the guy who was always at the top of the grade ranking. I began pursuing him and learned about his poor family background. He lived with his grandma, lost most of his hearing from an illness, and wasn't much of a talker. I also found out that he worked hard and was a perpetual top student. Richard was cold to people because he was bullied a lot, and I was no exception. Getting close to him was incredibly tough. But I didn't give up. I made him breakfast, sang to him, and gradually inched closer. He started smiling at me more. The day we got together, I gave him a hearing aid and confessed, "Richard, I like you." I saw tears glistening in his eyes and playfully ruffled his hair. He suddenly hugged me tightly, burying his head in my neck, hot tears streaming down. I thought, he's falling for me. After graduation, he joined my family's company and stayed in town for me. We naturally fell in love and got married. During that time, his grandma passed away, and I was by his side. Richard held me close, his voice low and choked, saying, "You are the person I love most in this world." I hugged him back just as tightly. Later, while living a mundane life with Richard, I started feeling bored and empty. Then Stephen came along. He was young, energetic, and charming, always making me happy. Plus, he was really competent at work. I grew closer to Stephen and began pushing Richard away. Richard became more silent, sometimes giving me looks I didn't recognize. But after 10 years, I was sure he'd never leave. At a celebration party, I slapped Richard for Stephen. He looked at me quietly, then took off his hearing aid and threw it in the trash. It was a long time before I realized that was the first hearing aid I gave him. He cherished it more than his own life. It was then he decided to leave, but I kept deceiving myself. I thought his love for me could withstand anything. I recklessly suppressed him, favored Stephen, like it was some kind of competition. The more distant Richard became, the more angry I got. Finally, he left. I searched for him for a long, long time. But when we met again, his eyes held none of the love they once did. I tried a lot, sent him gifts, cooked special meals, even ended up in the hospital. But in the hospital, Richard's gaze was firm, as cold as when I first knew him. I was terrified and realized too late he was really leaving. Richard held my true feelings in high regard, but I made a fatal mistake. There was no going back. Richard stood by me for 10 years and now wouldn't even glance my way. Those memories vanished into thin air. I suppose in the years without Richard, I'll always feel alone.